In front of a building with towering columns, Monica slowly opened her eyes, initially perceiving her surroundings as a blinding white void. Gradually, the scene came into focus, revealing a church that triggered a faint memory she had seen a similar one on television. In that instant, Monica realized the unsettling truth: she had died for the second time and found herself in an unfamiliar, otherworldly place. She glanced down at her hands, only to discover they belonged to a child's body. The shock of her recent death still lingering, Monica was approached by a man with long gray hair and a beard. He began to explain her situation in vague terms, revealing that she was a candidate for regression and that to return to her original form, she must first reclaim her true identity. Noticing 4 stars on Monica, the man deduced that her previous death had occurred under tragic circumstances. As fragments of her past life resurfaced, Monica remembered that she once lived on Earth under a different name. She had been a renowned gamer and streamer with a large following, her popularity stemming not from her appearance, since she never revealed her face, but from her distinctive voice. Life had been going well, with a stable income, until one day, she suffered a heart attack immediately after a stream. Even now, she struggled to comprehend how it had happened. But in this new reality, she found herself in a different world, known as the Exta Empire, where she had assumed the role of the second princess. Her mother had died long ago in a war, and her father, often ill, had raised her as best he could. Monica also had a sweet and beautiful sister named Linda, and at first, she felt a glimmer of hope at the prospect of living once again. Monica's older sister, more beautiful and kind-hearted, adored her younger sibling. Tragically, however, Linda succumbed to an illness at the age of 3. Not long after, a rebellion erupted, and their sickly father passed away as well. Their uncle Theodore then seized the throne. A cruel man, Uncle Theodore once locked Monica in a cold room, and assigned her a harsh mentor who frequently beat her. Only her nanny provided any semblance of comfort. As time went on, when Monica was 16, Uncle Theodore died from illness, leaving her with no one else. She was forced to become empress, ruling over a fractured empire until her own death. And now, upon opening her eyes once more, she found herself in the body of a young child in this strange place. A bearded man carried Monica over to 4 other babies seated on a rug before a woman draped in a veil, who sat regally on a throne. This woman, a goddess, declared all 4 babies candidates for regression and promised each special gifts. The purest child was granted the best family, the next one a slightly worse family, the third child was destined for a generally poor family, and the last was given no chance to return at all. Monica immediately began to cry, terrified of being reborn into yet another family, fearing the hardships that might await her. She recalled the immense suffering of her second life, born into a cruel and abusive family that eventually sentenced her to death. The other babies also started crying, prompting the goddess to propose a solution. She decided that if no one wanted to be reborn into a bad family, they could all remain in this realm except for Monica, who would have to sacrifice herself for the sake of the others. Remembering the old man's words about the black star representing her past life, Monica realized that unlike the other babies, she had lived before. None of them bore stars like hers, so despite the daunting prospect of living another life, she did not despair. Though apprehensive about the concept of sacrifice, Monica ultimately agreed and began to say her goodbyes to her newfound friends. Moved by Monica's willingness to sacrifice herself, the goddess granted her another gift, 3 pouches, from which Monica had to choose only 2. She selected one that smelled sweet and another that was visually appealing. As the first pouch opened, a crown appeared on Monica's head, symbolizing that she would be placed in a good family. The goddess instructed her to examine the second pouch later, as the time had come for Monica to embark on her new journey. The goddess always found joy in the laughter of children, particularly in the case of this little girl from another world. Monica, with her resilient spirit and ability to adapt, had captured the goddess's heart so much so that she even considered making her the successor. Cradling Monica in her arms, the goddess gently rocked her to sleep, her voice soothing and melodic. In the next moment, Monica awoke as a princess in a luxurious palace, where her nanny, Rose, was attentively tending to her needs. However, when the little girl suddenly vomited, Rose was deeply concerned. Monica, too, felt a wave of dread wash over her as she recognized something all too familiar. She was back in the same family where she had lived her second life, and the horrifying realization struck her that the goddess had deceived her. The thought of enduring that torturous existence again, only to become a puppet empress with a tragic end, overwhelmed her, and she burst into tears. Rose, noticing her distress, tried to comfort her, but the fear was too deep. Later, Monica approached a mirror and was startled to see a different face staring back at her. This was not the face she remembered from her previous life. Slowly, it dawned on her she had become her sister, the one with pink hair and bright green eyes. The realization that she now bore her sister's visage brought a mix of relief and confusion. Although she and her sister had different eye colors, this detail seemed insignificant compared to the hope it ignited in her heart. As her sister, perhaps she would not suffer the same fate as before. But then, Rose called her by her old name, and Monica's hope wavered. Despite her new appearance, she was still referred to as the timid little sister. In her first life, Monica had been quiet and reserved, her identity as a streamer hidden from everyone. Now, Rose found it amusing that Monica kept glancing at herself in the mirrors, her curiosity apparent. When Monica tried to ask about her sister, her words faltered, and she struggled to speak. Still, she managed to convey her interest, leaving Rose surprised, for Linda, her sister, had died 2 years earlier from an illness. The realization that she had somehow become her sister, yet retained her name and memories, was bewildering. Monica found it ironic that Linda's name remained unchanged, yet she couldn't grasp why she resembled her so closely. As Rose worried that she had said too much, Monica pondered the goddess's words, that her soul was from another world. She wondered if the body could survive with her soul, and if not, whether it would perish entirely. The sorrow of losing Linda once again weighed heavily on her. Sensing Monica's sadness, Rose offered her a piece of cotton candy to lift her spirits. The sweet treat had an immediate calming effect, and Monica realized with a start that her thoughts were now childlike. Rose, meanwhile, doted on the girl, calling her a treasure, a stark contrast to Monica's memories of her previous life, where only her older sister had been adored. In this new life, Monica hoped she wouldn't be hated as she had been before. She resolved to be brave like her sister had been and, with a playful wink at her reflection, decided to embrace this new identity. Rose, noticing the wink, let out an excited scream and quickly summoned the other maids. They rushed in, fearing something serious had happened, only to find the nanny beaming with joy. Monica soon realized that everyone was delighted simply because she had winked, a small but significant gesture that made her wonder if she could live like her sister, who had always seemed to radiate inner joy. As the maids fawned over her, Monica noticed a faint glow at the back of the room. Intrigued, she saw an inscription within the light, indicating that user Monica had fulfilled the conditions. Excitedly, she pointed it out to Rose, but the nanny saw nothing. It was then that Monica recognized the glow's color. It matched the pouch the goddess had given her. Within the glowing light, Monica saw an unexpected message appear: a chat between the spatial streamer is now open. Moments later, a shared channel materialized, revealing the presence of 3 maids: Amy, Becky, and Faith. Amy enthusiastically commented on how adorable the princess was, expressing a desire for Monica to be her younger sister. This chat resembled the ones Monica had experienced during her first life as a streamer, and she was rewarded with 30 points of interest for the praise. The whole situation felt eerily similar to her past life, yet with crucial differences. There was no monetary gain, and the stakes seemed more intangible. Distracted by the interaction, Monica suddenly craved more cotton candy. Although Rose, her nanny, initially refused, concerned about spoiling her appetite before dinner, Monica's sweet smile and pleading eyes eventually won her over, earning her another piece. As she enjoyed the treat, a new notification appeared in the glow. It stated that the goddess was impressed by how swiftly Monica had adapted, and as a result, her skills had increased. Reading further, Monica learned that she had been blessed by the goddess but still needed to win the love of as many people as possible. The realization dawned on Monica that she would increasingly embody the behavior of a child, an adaptation to her new life. Her thoughts were interrupted when another maid hurried into the room, announcing an emergency. Outside, a carriage had arrived, and a young man stepped out, making his way toward the palace. The maids quickly deduced that this was a guest for the princess, though none of them knew who he was or why he had come. As the door opened, Monica saw him clearly for the first time: Brad Willow, a striking figure with cold eyes, vivid red hair, and broad shoulders. Brad Willow was the warlord of the empire and ruler of the northern region, and as it turned out, he was Monica's uncle, the half-brother of her late mother. In her second life, Monica remembered that Brad had died from injuries sustained while battling a poisonous dragon, leading to a rebellion in the northern lands. The region he ruled was plagued by monstrous creatures, and only those with dragon blood could maintain order there. The Duke, who had once slain one of the most formidable dragons, never returned alive due to his severe injuries. Monica had rarely seen him, but his death had saddened her, given their familial connection. This time, Brad had come to take Monica to the temple for a ritual blessing, although he seemed reluctant to do so. Monica quickly realized that her uncle intended to confront the dragon Rex, one of the strongest in the land. She remembered that this mission had been part of the Emperor's secret plans, although he pretended to be ignorant of the Duke's intentions. Despite her craving for more cotton candy, Monica knew she had to focus on the gravity of the situation. In this empire, the imperial family was required to receive a blessing at the temple every year. If any family member failed to attend, the imperial lineage, descended from the Golden Beast, would be cursed and doomed to misery. This year, it was Monica's turn to go. However, Brad suddenly decided against taking Monica to the temple. His friend, concerned about the potential fallout, argued that it wasn't wise to strain relations with the imperial family, especially since the emperor was searching for signs of weakness in the northern lands. The Duke was obliged to escort his niece to the temple. Monica, reflecting on her second life, knew that the Brad she had known back then would never have been swayed by such arguments. He had ignored her pleas for help, leaving her to suffer alone. Rose, noticing the tension, cautiously approached Brad and spoke to him. Monica feared for her nanny, knowing that in the Emperor's presence, such boldness could result in severe punishment. She silently vowed to protect Rose, even if it meant confronting Brad directly. However, to her surprise, Brad did not react angrily. This set him apart from the Emperor, who would have swiftly dealt with anyone daring to interfere. Rose didn't challenge the Duke but instead invited him to dine with the princess, as he was her guest. Brad declined, citing his lack of time. His friend, however, advised him to stay a while longer, warning that if they left immediately, the Emperor might send them back. The political landscape of the empire was complex, divided among three primary powers: the imperial family, the dukes representing each season, and the mighty wizard's tower. Monica understood that her uncle's actions were influenced by the delicate balance of these powers. Among the powerful factions of the empire, Duke Brad Willow held dominion over the north, a land of perpetual winter and wild beasts. As the military commander of the empire, his rule extended over a region that supplied crucial resources like coal, magical metals, and a variety of items derived from animal skins. Though the north was technically part of the empire, it operated with a level of autonomy that made it feel like an independent country, trading on its own terms. Relations with the imperial family were strained, largely due to the tumultuous history between them. The current imperial family had seized power by assassinating the previous emperor, a move that cemented a deep-seated animosity. Monica's mother, Samantha, who was the head of the Willow family, might have been a formidable warrior herself, but she chose instead to marry the emperor and passed the family rule to her half-brother, Brad. Her death during a war that Brad had sent her to fight only exacerbated the tensions, leaving the relationship between their families fraught with unresolved resentment. The Willow family's power was traditionally passed down through generations of emperors, and without the emperor's support, war might have erupted long ago. During dinner, Rose carefully spoon-fed Monica, while also encouraging her to learn how to eat on her own. As Monica fumbled with her utensils, she noticed her uncle's gaze fixed on her. Remembering the cold indifference he had shown her in her second life, she hesitated but ultimately decided to try speaking to him. Despite the bitterness of their past interactions, he was now her only living relative. Determined to engage him, Monica made a show of eating on her own, then cheekily complained that Rose rarely let her have candy. Brad studied her closely and concluded that she had not inherited the emperor's bloodline. Children of the emperor were typically born with blonde hair, yet neither Monica nor her sister Linda had this trait. In her past life, Linda had been universally adored, while Monica had yearned for even a single person's affection. Now, though, Monica had Rose, who cherished her deeply, and she couldn't help but wonder if her uncle might come to care for her, too. Mustering her courage, she asked Brad directly if he loved her, at least a little. Brad, however, remained emotionally distant, and Monica understood that while his lack of affection was disheartening, it was still better than the outright hatred she had experienced in her previous life. Desperate for some connection, Monica walked over to Brad and asked him for a hug. He seemed puzzled by her request, uncertain why she would want such a thing. To him, she appeared as impulsive and straightforward as her sister had been. Not wanting to upset the child, Brad's friend, Greg, who was a knight, picked her up instead, hoping to comfort her. Monica, noticing that everyone in the chat room was present except for her uncle, felt a pang of disappointment. His absence indicated that he wasn't interested in her, which only made her more determined to win his favor. Her emotions overwhelmed her, and she began to cry, prompting Greg to pass her back to Brad, who reluctantly took her. Surprisingly, Monica immediately calmed down in his arms. She just wanted to be close to him, to feel some semblance of familial love. She realized that if Brad refused to take her to the temple, she would have to go with the knights, whom she feared and distrusted from her second life. She remembered the dire consequences of Brad's previous attempt to conquer the dragon Rex, which had led to his fatal injuries. The northern lands, already in decline, needed a leader strong enough to restore them to their former glory. Monica tried to appeal to Brad's sense of duty, hinting that she knew more than she should about the situation. She mentioned that there was a lot of cotton candy outside, though it didn't interest him. However, when she expressed her desire to see the dragon Rex, Brad was taken aback. No one was supposed to know about the dragon, not even the Emperor, and yet this little girl seemed to be aware of his plans. Brad's immediate thought was that Monica had somehow inherited the hidden blood of the Willow family, possibly making her a prophet. He joined the chat, and Monica noticed, but she had no idea what a prophet was. She had never encountered such a concept in her previous life and wondered if it was some kind of high-ranking position. As Brad pondered another dragon, Spike, which no one should know about either, he grew increasingly suspicious of Monica's knowledge. He held her more tightly, causing her to feel a twinge of fear, and Rose quickly moved to take her back. Brad, however, couldn't shake the thought of how light she was compared to his youngest son, who was much heavier at the same age. This realization made him more curious about the child he now held. Monica, still thinking about her missed candy, let out a small whimper, which Brad quickly soothed by handing it back to her. As she nibbled on the treat, he asked her directly where she had heard about Spike. Monica, still confused and unsure of how to respond, realized that she had stumbled into a deeper, more dangerous game than she had anticipated. The look in Brad's eyes told her that she needed to tread carefully, even as she sought to understand her new role in this life. In her previous life, the conquest of the fire dragon Spike had been shrouded in secrecy, entangled with international intrigues and other countries' agendas. Monica had vaguely recalled hearing about the operation's success, but the details had been obscured by the Emperor's manipulative schemes. Now, when pressed by her uncle Brad, Monica admitted that she had heard he had already captured the dragon, though she couldn't recall from whom. She hoped that by sharing this information, Brad would be convinced to take her to the temple himself, ensuring her safety along the way. Brad, sensing the gravity of Monica's knowledge, summoned his subordinate, Hillary, to inquire about how frequently the princess had contact with the Emperor. Hillary reported that these interactions occurred only once a month, which led her to suspect that the Emperor might already be aware of Brad's plans. The possibility of a leak and betrayal crossed her mind, but Brad was more focused on why the Emperor would discuss such sensitive matters in front of Monica. The Duke began to suspect that this was done deliberately, a ploy to sow discord within his ranks. Determined to uncover the traitor, Brad silently vowed that he wouldn't live long enough for the Emperor's schemes to play out, and Hillary made a mental note to contact headquarters at the first opportunity. Resolving to personally escort Monica to the temple, Brad ordered Greg to make the necessary preparations, instructing Rose to handle the luggage. He also decided to bring Rose along for the journey, much to Monica's dismay. When she whimpered in protest, Brad quickly shoved a few lollipops into her mouth to pacify her, which worked as intended. The Duke also made a mental note to ensure that Monica's diet was improved. Her light weight concerned him. 5 days later, after having not seen her uncle during the interim, Monica found herself part of a well-armed entourage heading towards the temple. Despite the large company and the variety of food offered to her, Monica felt lonely and bored. She couldn't shake the thought of how to win her uncle's affection, especially since all of his subordinates seemed to find her charming and beautiful. The chat room had become increasingly lively, with more people joining in to express their admiration for the little princess. Monica then noticed a small, new window appear, something she hadn't seen before during her streaming days, and realized it allowed her to read people's thoughts when they looked directly at her. Just as she was processing this new ability, a mysterious girl named Helen approached. Dressed in a long robe with a large hood, Helen ordered everyone to disperse as she made her way toward Monica. Meanwhile, in a distant castle, the emperor was scolding a subordinate for failing a previous mission. The man was given a final chance to return to the castle with the princess or face execution. Helen, holding a magic staff in one hand, extended a plate with a slice of strawberry cake toward Monica with the other. She explained that she had procured the cake from the city of York, a place that was about a day's journey away. The other people nearby began murmuring among themselves, realizing that Helen must have used magic to obtain the cake so quickly, though she seemed unconcerned by this breach of protocol. Monica, however, recalled that her mother hadn't blessed her with the gift of mana, and Helen's actions sparked a reminder among the onlookers to treat the princess with respect. Curious, Monica glanced at the mind-reading window that had appeared when Helen looked directly at her, discovering that Helen suffered from malphobia, a fear or aversion to magic. Monica found herself reflecting on her self-perception as a streamer, wondering why she called herself that when she didn't even know how to communicate with people effectively. Despite these thoughts, the cake looked delicious, and Monica gratefully accepted it. However, when Helen tried to hug her, Monica dropped her fork, losing a piece of strawberry, which greatly upset her. Sensing her distress, Uncle Brad arrived just in time, catching the falling fork midair and handing it back to Monica. He then announced that after 5 days of travel, everyone was due for a rest, although Monica, eager for companionship, continued to ask the others to play with her. Brad, recognizing the weariness of his subordinates, decided to take Monica with him so the rest could relax. He noticed that their behavior toward Monica was oddly deferential, something he had never observed before. Before sitting Monica down in a comfortable chair, Brad handed her a plate with the remaining cake so she could finish it. Once she was done, Monica looked up at her uncle, longing for a hug, but Brad chose instead to sit quietly beside her, still keeping a distance. Monica continued to plead with her uncle, and the subjects around them began to question how he could remain so indifferent to her. In response, Duke Brad Willow arranged for a new, more comfortable carriage and provided everyone with delicious food. The wizards in their company also helped to prevent motion sickness. This treatment was a far cry from what Monica had experienced in her second life, where she was often given little to no food when traveling with the knights. Now, she began to view Brad as a far better guardian than the imperial family had ever been and wished he could stay by her side permanently. Monica noticed that her uncle had briefly entered the chat only to leave almost immediately, making her worry that he had lost interest in her. However, before her concerns could deepen, Brad handed her another candy, distracting her momentarily. He then made an unexpected remark about the amount of food consumed in the tent, which struck Monica as odd. She decided to listen carefully as Brad asked if she had ever seen a specific book in the Emperor's possession. At that moment, Greg approached and produced a crystal, from which he conjured a book with an ornate cover. Monica instantly recognized it as a personal biographical dictionary, a record where the imperial family noted the names of extraordinary individuals and documented their talents, especially those who contributed to the protection of the sun. The first emperor had been born under the light of the beast and had received Minerva's blessing, which turned his hair golden. Since then, most imperial children were born blonde and endowed with innate talents. Monica, however, had been an exception, not displaying the typical characteristics of the imperial lineage. Monica recalled from her second life that this book was not just a record but a tool used to control and manipulate those with talents, many of whom were eventually killed. When Brad repeated his question, Monica admitted that she had seen such a book before. She vividly remembered its contents because she had once been responsible for recording the names in it. However, she hesitated, aware of the book's dark history and the fate that had befallen those listed within it. Monica contemplated her next move, wondering how she could ensure that her uncle would take her to the estate, where she hoped she might enjoy even more candy. Deciding to use her knowledge as leverage, she pointed to the book and remarked that the one she had seen before was slightly darker in color and much larger in size. She hoped that by sharing this detail, she could persuade the Duke to take her along, knowing that her insights could prove valuable to him. With this in mind, Monica subtly positioned herself as an indispensable source of information, hoping that her uncle would see the benefit of keeping her close. Brad, sensing the importance of her knowledge, decided to coax more information out of her. He brought her various cakes, promised Monica an assortment of cakes, offering them as a reward if she revealed everything she had read in the mysterious book. Despite his lack of genuine hope, he was desperate for any information, as the secret behind the conquest of Spike was leaking. As a first step, Brad decided to show her images of various individuals, asking if she recognized anyone. Monica, yearning for a life among people who loved her, quickly agreed to her uncle's request, eager to please. In return, Brad promised her that for each correct answer, she would receive a cake, with the possibility of earning up to 100 cakes. If her responses exceeded 100, she would be granted a coupon, redeemable for even more cakes. The Duke then presented her with a portrait of the first man, and to his surprise, Monica instantly recognized him. He had been one of her uncle's subordinates and, in her previous life, was the very person who had tormented and manipulated her. Despite her initial admission, Monica hesitated, fearing her uncle wouldn't believe her, just as no one had believed her in her past life. However, Brad praised her for her honesty and rewarded her with a cake, encouraging her to continue. The next person introduced was Greg, a test to see if Monica's insights would hold. Though the situation felt peculiar, Monica realized that her uncle saw her as more useful than she had imagined. Brad, however, grew increasingly skeptical of the value of the information Monica provided. He began to consider the implications of taking her to his estate. Greg, ever loyal, reminded the Duke that he had recently planned to do so and confirmed the accuracy of the predictions Monica had shared. While the Duke was inclined to continue questioning, he felt they had reached an impasse. Nonetheless, he gave her another cake and allowed her to speak freely. As her uncle moved away to consult with Greg, Monica noticed a change in his demeanor. His expression had grown cold and menacing, which frightened her. Greg, sensing her fear, quickly reassured her, explaining that her uncle's harsh appearance was due to the gravity of the situation. Brad then asked Monica to identify another individual, whom she described as the most terrifying man she had ever encountered. This person, although highly skilled in conspiracies and responsible for many innocent deaths, was dangerous. Monica, trembling with fear, advised her uncle to dismiss the man immediately. However, Brad grew frustrated, dismissing her warnings as childish ramblings. His patience wearing thin, he shouted at her, demanding to know who the traitor was, which only reduced the girl to tears. She had no idea who the traitor might be, she only knew that this person was dangerous and frightening. Greg, remembering the Duke's similar behavior in Monica's previous life, intervened. He reminded Brad that it was he who had first brought up the question, and it was Monica who had originally spoken about the potential betrayal regarding Spike. Finding the traitor was proving difficult, if such a person even existed. While Brad wasn't entirely convinced, he couldn't deny that Monica's prophetic abilities were a rare gift, inherited from their family. This power, the ability to foresee the future, required a unique counterpart, a knight of protection. Brad's thoughts turned to his pupil, a knight who had been training tirelessly in anticipation of his master's return. The last of the Knights of Protection had existed over 200 years ago, and they were always born with immense strength. However, if a knight could not find a prophet to bond with, they would gradually lose control of their power, spiraling into madness or death. This knight, now waiting for Brad's guidance, was on the brink of this fate, and the situation was becoming increasingly urgent. Greg suggested that there had been a misunderstanding, and if Monica truly was a prophet, then the Duke's approach was only cornering her unnecessarily. However, this remained unproven, and Brad still harbored lingering doubts. When one of his subordinates approached, they insisted that the princess was completely innocent, pointing out that she was still just a small child. The Duke, feeling exasperated, thought that everyone around him had lost their minds. Meanwhile, Monica, overwhelmed, began to cry, and the sight of her tears stirred sympathy among the onlookers. Many of them started to believe that the girl wasn't at fault, perhaps it was the Duke himself who was to blame, and they predicted that in the future, he would come to regret his harshness. Monica was taken aback by the sudden surge of support around her, and as a result, she gained even more points that held significance beyond mere sympathy. They granted her the opportunity to receive a gift from the gods themselves. She needed only to persevere a little longer. Her nanny, who had always stood by her, even in a past life, scooped her up and hugged her tightly. Soon, Helen approached Brad, offering a solution. She, too, believed a misunderstanding had occurred and suggested they use magic to uncover the truth, even though doing so could cost her all of her strength. Helen was willing to take that risk, reasoning that if she fainted, others could carry her to safety. Monica's eyes were swollen from crying, and Rose tried to console her by offering cakes and treats. In the end, Helen indeed collapsed from the effort, which greatly upset the young princess. Now, everyone felt pity for the child, except Brad, who remained unmoved, much like in Monica's past life. Later, Brad approached her, and Monica, confused, wasn't sure what to expect from him. She even briefly wondered if his behavior was influenced by the injuries he'd sustained in his battle with the dragon, but above all, she didn't want him to die. Overcome with fear, Monica shouted that she was scared of him. Greg, seeing the situation escalate, advised Brad to soften his expression, warning that his stern demeanor was only intensifying the girl's fear. The Duke, unaware of the impact his actions had, realized he needed to reconsider his approach toward the princess. As he looked at Monica again, he reflected on how different she was from his own children, but despite this, he decided to show her some kindness. He presented her with a small box filled with the finest figs, hoping it would please her. Monica eyed the box cautiously, hesitating, and Brad suspected she feared the possibility of poison. But within moments, the little girl eagerly demanded the box. Upon opening it, she discovered another cake, this one filled with her beloved dates. Unable to resist the delicious treat, Monica was quickly won over. Seeing her joy, Brad, in a rare gesture of warmth, offered to stock up on the treats and fill an entire wagon with them. The date cake seemed like an apology of sorts, and in response, Monica extended her little pinky finger to him, a childish promise that amused the Duke. It was, perhaps, the most trivial vow he had ever made, but it was enough to ease the tension between them. Moments later, Monica asked to be held, and Brad, bemused by her sudden shift in mood, complied. Despite her earlier fear, the young princess accepted her uncle once more, recognizing his kindness and knowing that she alone had the power to prevent his death. As the scene unfolded, Brad noticed that Monica's increasing fondness for sweets was beginning to cause her to gain weight. With this in mind, he decided against renting an entire bakery in the next town, despite his earlier consideration. Yet, Monica sensed this hesitation and felt that he should still go through with it as a final gesture of reconciliation. Monica considered anyone who fed her to be kind, which made her journey to the temple, a 15-day trip, somewhat bearable. By the 8th day, however, she grew noticeably bored. Her attendants did their best to amuse her with handmade rattles and toys, but Helen, ever protective, kept many away, fearing they could harm the princess. Despite this, Monica had come to know the names of her subjects, and they often showered her with gifts. She relished the attention, especially since, in her second life, she hadn't even had a simple rattle. Everything had been given to her sister, Linda. Now, Monica was finally experiencing the affection and care she had always longed for. But strange things began happening on the journey. One of the men seemed to lose his mind, loudly proclaiming his desire for marriage and a child that would look like a little rabbit. In a fit of madness, he pounded his fists against a tree, bewildering Monica. Another individual bizarrely volunteered to give all their blood to Monica if she ever decided to become a mosquito. Someone else refused to leave their post because the princess wasn't there, while yet another dreamed of having a granddaughter like her. Meanwhile, Helen dealt with a particularly troubling situation. A male wizard, obsessed with sending his heart to Monica, had tried to confront her that day. The princess found the chaos unsettling, especially when the training session began. Held once a day, this practice prepared the squad for their ultimate mission, to conquer the dragon at Spike. During these times, Monica stayed with her nanny. As the training progressed, the princess glanced into what she called the chat, a place where people's thoughts and comments seemed to appear like a window. She wondered if she could somehow communicate with them, wanting to offer something in return. Suddenly, her status increased, elevating her rank from a simpleton to a baron. With this promotion came a reward. Previously, her achievements had only earned her silver and gold buttons, but now she was officially a Baroness. She didn't fully understand the significance of this, but it made her feel important nonetheless. Despite her newfound status, Monica's focus returned to more immediate concerns like her craving for sugar. She demanded more sweets, but the nanny remained firm, allowing her only one candy before her meal. While they conversed, something lurked in the bushes, unnoticed by the group. Monica heard a faint rustling just before the creature prepared to leap from its hiding place, growling menacingly. Rose, the nanny, instinctively pulled Monica close, and the monster's growls echoed even across the distant training grounds. Moments later, the werewolf emerged, snarling. The nurse was visibly terrified, but the people quickly rallied, grabbing arrows and whatever weapons they could find. A fierce battle ensued, with the werewolf holding its ground against the group. Just as the situation seemed dire, the Duke arrived. With determined precision, he repeatedly thrust his sword into the beast, leaving it no chance for survival. Meanwhile, Monica and her nanny were rushed into a carriage to ensure their safety. Monica, having lived 2 lives, no longer feared monsters. She had long since learned that people could be far more terrifying. She had seen how humans could manipulate others, using her like a puppet in her past life and causing far more harm than any monster could. As these thoughts crossed her mind, the werewolf, barely clinging to life, limped towards their carriage. To Monica's horror, it began to stretch out its paw toward them, its savage eyes locking with hers through the window. Rose clutched the princess even tighter, ready to sacrifice herself if necessary to keep the girl safe. But the werewolf's black claws were already dangerously close to Monica's head, and with its other paw, the creature tore off the roof of the carriage. Monica, believing her end had come, braced herself. In the next moment, however, she found herself in her Uncle Brad's arms, safe. The nanny, too, had survived, and Brad shielded Monica's eyes as he carried her past the mangled remains of the werewolf. Despite his efforts, Monica tried to push his hand away to see, but he firmly refused to let her look. Trembling, Monica admitted to her uncle that she was scared. Brad reassured her, telling her that the werewolves were already dead and there was nothing left to fear. Inwardly, however, he thought the princess was simply being cowardly, unable to understand why she would be so frightened by a mere corpse. To him, this fear marked a stark difference between her and his own son, who would have shown more courage in such a situation. After a while, Monica asked to be let down, despite her earlier terror. Her mind wandered back to how Brad had been furious with her just 3 days prior, and she began to wonder if he was teasing her again now. Still, Brad insisted that she avoid looking at the dead werewolves and reminded her that they had faced 5 of the creatures in total. At that moment, Greg approached and recalled the legendary feats of the Sun Empress, Monica's mother, who had captured a werewolf before the age of 7. By 5, she had already subdued 2. Monica realized the story was about her mother, and from legends, she knew the first dragon had been killed by a member of the Willow family, whose blood was said to be intertwined with the dragon's. This mixture of blood was the source of great power, leading many to claim there were no more skilled generals or prosecutors than those of the Willow lineage. Brad, in his musings, wondered if Monica, too, had dragon blood in her veins, unaware that the young girl could sense his thoughts. Once the werewolves' bodies were removed, the Duke finally released the princess, and Rose rushed over, her relief palpable. She was overjoyed that the ordeal had ended and, most importantly, that Monica was unharmed. To celebrate, Rose indulged Monica's wishes and handed her a handful of sweets, a rare treat. As the people around them began to rest, weary from the battle, Monica noticed that the werewolves were hardly a significant threat compared to the dragon they would eventually face. Wanting to show her gratitude, the princess decided to share her candy with Greg, who was touched by her gesture, feeling a surge of childlike joy. Monica then distributed sweets to the magicians, thanking them for their efforts in protecting her. She saved the most beautiful candy for Helen, recognizing the power of her truth spell. Finally, Monica approached Brad, offering him her favorite candy as a token of thanks for saving her. The Duke tried to explain that gratitude ran deep in the blood of the Willow family, but the girl, thinking he wanted to take her with him, became excited by the idea. Monica expressed her wish to stay with the people longer, her eyes lighting up at the prospect. Her eagerness took Brad by surprise, leaving him slightly puzzled by her sudden enthusiasm to remain by his side. Suddenly, behind the Duke, Monica spotted another werewolf, even larger than the ones before.
This was no ordinary werewolf, it was the king of werewolves.
Yet, Brad showed no fear. In a swift, decisive move, he struck down the beast. When he returned to Monica's side,
Greg approached, holding a small bundle.
As the cloth was unwrapped, Monica's eyes widened. Inside was a small desert fox. The creature, in its own way, began to vocalize its demands to be set free. No one could understand how the fox had ended up in the werewolf's grasp, and Monica, curious, asked what kind of animal it was and whether it could speak. Her uncle informed her that it could only bark.
However, Monica realized that she alone could understand the fox's words and wasn't sure if she should admit this strange ability.
Meanwhile, Greg suggested they include in their report that a mysterious object wrapped in red cloth had been found in the wolfhound's circle, and upon opening it, they discovered it was a living creature. The knights speculated that it might be a sacred animal, though Greg himself was doubtful, as the fox didn't seem particularly holy. The other knights agreed it was peculiar to find such a creature here, especially since sacred animals were only known to inhabit the purest places. Greg proposed informing the imperial family, but one of the knights quickly stopped him, pointing out the potential consequences. If the emperor discovered this, it could lead to trouble.
Instead, they debated whether to claim that the sacred animal had been stolen.
The situation became more complicated as they discussed what to do next, considering the seriousness of what they had found. Brad, after thinking it through, gave the order to first burn the corpses of the werewolves using magic and to take the fox with them. Just as they were about to secure the fox, it suddenly broke free, darting around the camp.
5 knights chased it, but only Greg managed to catch it.
Despite its small size, the fox was surprisingly strong, making it clear that it would require careful handling. Greg then remembered an old legend: sacred beasts only obey their true masters. Few people were aware of this, and the knights began to wonder how they might tame the fox. Monica, growing tired of watching the commotion, turned to leave when she heard the fox calling out to her in a voice only she could understand, asking her to stop. The fox, aware that the princess could comprehend its speech, continued pleading for Monica's attention. An idea suddenly came to her, and she asked her uncle if she could hold the fox. However, Brad refused, citing concerns for her safety. The fox, sensing Monica's desire to help, made a bold offer. It said she could touch its tail if she held it in her arms. Monica, determined, began to beg the Duke, pleading with him to let her hold the fox just once. Despite her persistence, Brad remained firm in his refusal, worried about the risks involved. The girl's prayers fell on deaf ears as her uncle remained relentless in his decision. Monica felt offended when her request to hold the fox was denied, but Greg noticed that both the princess and the fox had calmed down. After reconsidering, Brad allowed the fox to be placed near Monica so she could finally touch the animal. Monica eagerly stretched out her hands toward the fox. The princess immediately stretched her hands out to the fox, which made people worry that the animal might bite her. The knights began to murmur, wondering if only the fox's owner was allowed to touch it. One of the knights decided to test it, reaching his hand toward the fox, but the creature suddenly leaped away and jumped straight into Monica's arms, clinging to her. The fox seemed to recognize that she hadn't made a mistake. She sensed divine power in Monica. The crowd was shocked as the princess calmly held the fox, which made no attempt to escape. The desert fox then spoke to Monica, explaining that she had been chosen by God. This made the girl ponder, speculating that it might have happened when she returned to this world. Meanwhile, the fox snuggled closer to her, even licking her lips a few times. Remembering the second bag she had, Monica decided to open it and was rewarded with a divine gift. The fox continued to celebrate, feeling honored to have met the messenger of God. Monica was a bit startled when she realized the fox could hear her thoughts. The fox then formally introduced herself as Angela, the messenger of a god named Angela. She explained that she had been sent to watch over sins but would eventually return to heaven. Angela told the princess that she had been waiting to meet her and could assist her in the future. The people around, still unsure how a young girl had managed to tame a sacred animal, watched in awe. Some even believed they, too, might master the fox just by touching it, but they quickly realized that wasn't the case. The crowd unconsciously began to approach to get a closer look, but this frightened the fox. Angela asked Monica to make them step back, explaining that she wasn't fond of people. The princess complied with her request and even started to cry when Brad Willow, her uncle, approached. Brad immediately commanded everyone to keep quiet about what had occurred, threatening that anyone who spoke of it would lose their eyes. He warned that if anyone dared to speak out, he would cut off their ears and gouge out their eyes before they reached the palace. Angela, curious about the man, asked Monica who he was and learned that he was her uncle. It was the first time the fox had encountered such a powerful man, and she could feel his strength. Angela even speculated that if Brad managed to defeat the fire dragon, he would become the greatest man in the empire. She also revealed to Monica that after touching her, she had become her mistress. Monica was pleased, but mostly because she was happy to have such a soft and warm animal. 2 days later, the party continued their journey, with the fox spending most of her time on Monica's lap. Eventually, the princess's legs went numb, and Brad moved the fox to help. Angela, concerned, asked her mistress what was wrong, and Monica explained that her legs had fallen asleep while Angela rested on them. Afterward, Monica asked her uncle to hold her, and Brad, pushing the fox aside, picked up his niece. At that moment, the carriage they were in suddenly tilted and fell over, but no one was harmed. A knight immediately offered them a new carriage, as the previous one was broken. Rose, another companion, requested that the princess inform her if anything bothered her. Monica wanted to travel with her nurse, but the duke hadn't given permission. Traditionally, only the duke's wife, direct descendants, or close vassals were allowed to ride together. Despite this, Brad was unexpectedly considerate and allowed the nurse to accompany them. He continued to hold his niece, as their destination wasn't far. Soon, a grand palace came into view, magnificent and awe-inspiring. They had arrived in just 5 days, and the city where they were headed lay ahead. To celebrate their arrival, Brad gave Monica a handful of sweets. The princess hadn't even realized they were so close, having spent most of the journey eating and sleeping. As they approached the palace, Monica began to realize that she might soon have to part with the people she had grown accustomed to. Absent-mindedly, she tugged on Angela's tail. The fox sensed that the girl was fond of her uncle and wanted to stay close to him. Meanwhile, Brad embraced his niece and reassured her that he would fulfill his promise once they reached the city. Once there, he planned to indulge the princess with figs, while Angela hinted that Monica should make use of her uncle's influence. Monica was also given permission to explore the city, as they would be staying for the day. Angela suggested that Brad accompany her, and the princess immediately asked if he could join her. Although the duke had many tasks to attend to, he couldn't resist Monica's pleading eyes and agreed, though not for long. Everyone became absorbed in their thoughts. Brad reflected on how this would be their last meeting, while Monica tried to devise ways to keep him close. As their carriage rolled through the city, Monica noticed the cold, distant expression on her uncle's face. She wished she could find a way to melt his heart, as though it were cotton candy, and lure him to her side. Monica longed for him to take her to the northern part of the country, but the more she thought about it, the more daunting it seemed. Nonetheless, the princess felt confident that if she stayed by his side, everything would eventually work out, though navigating these emotions in reality was proving much more difficult than it had in her past life. Monica could speak clearly and confidently when no one was watching her, but as soon as she met someone's gaze, she would immediately become shy and start to stammer. She thought that this might be why she could now view chat windows, helping her get along better with people in this world. Monica also recalled her second life, where she had not been a skilled communicator, nor an empress who knew how to rule effectively. On the contrary, she had been one of the worst rulers, and her life had been filled with misery and pain, so much so that she didn't want to remember it. Looking back, Monica realized that there were no good people in her past life, not even the blacksmiths or architects. But one young official stood out in her memory. He was different from the rest. Shortly before a rebellion broke out, she was arrested, and no one treated her kindly, not even the servants in the fortress, who looked down on her, making her deeply sad. While she was on death row, she overheard a man speaking to the guards about how rude they were to the empress. He found the accusations against her ridiculous, given how young she was and how unlikely it was that she had acted of her own free will. Monica could only see the man's back, which resembled that of a knight, and she felt sorrow that she couldn't see his face to at least thank him. 10 days later, she was led to the square for her execution, with the crowd shouting in unison for her death. In her final moments, she thought back to what the official had said. The young empress regretted most that she had never seen his face. He was the last and only person to stand by her side before her death. But now, everything was different, and Monica had resolved to live differently. Still, she wished she could meet that official again. The fox, Angela, asked Monica what was occupying her thoughts, and Monica admitted that she wanted to stay with her uncle. Angela approved of this, as she believed her mistress deserved to live in luxury. However, Monica didn't have much time to win over her uncle, and she wasn't sure how to go about it. Then, one evening, Monica saw a knight leading her to a store filled with children's toys. The princess had heard of the store before but was seeing it for the first time with her own eyes. As a child, she had never owned toys, so the sight of such a variety filled her with delight. Monica expressed her desire to visit the store to her uncle, and he noticed the difference between her and his own son. Monica could sense his thoughts through the chat window, but she didn't know how to act on them. She found it hard to believe that, after all this time, her uncle hadn't developed a friendly bond with her. Then, Knight Mike scooped Monica into his arms and offered to take her on a walk to explore the city. Two more knights approached, eager to accompany the princess, and decided to settle who would go by playing rock paper scissors. Mike won the first round, but the other two argued about a rematch, claiming that someone was distracted. The knight asked Monica to wait while they resolved their dispute. Meanwhile, Monica's nurse approached, holding the desert fox, Angela, in her arms. Monica was overjoyed to see her beloved animal again, though she didn't understand why she had called Angela a toy earlier. Angela demanded to be fed, as she was very hungry. Just then, Brad arrived and suggested they eat and rest before continuing their walk. The knights, who had been arguing earlier, agreed with the Duke, as they too felt hungry. Hearing this, Monica realized she was also quite hungry and asked her nurse to feed her. Brad found it odd that his niece could be hungry after so many snacks but decided to take her to a restaurant. Soon, they were seated at a place known for its good service. As they waited, Monica thought about how the mages and knights they traveled with were kind and didn't care about social class. They all ate together and were friendly with one another. They were nothing like the discontented people in the imperial palace. The food arrived, and the princess was about to begin eating when she suddenly felt drowsy. Angela noticed Monica's fatigue, and the princess asked for some candy, thinking it might help her stay awake. However, her eyes closed, and she began to fall, causing Angela to slip to the floor. Rose, her nurse, tried to wake her, but the sleep was too powerful. Brad then remarked that Monica was covered in sweat, which raised concerns. The nurse checked her again and realized that the princess had developed a fever. Brad suspected that his niece was simply exhausted from their tight schedule and the wolves they had encountered on the journey. He immediately called for Mike, who was eating chicken legs, and ordered him to fetch a doctor. Mike, noticing the nurse's worry, hurried off to carry out the Duke's command. Brad, who had 3 sons, had never shown such concern for them, nor even for his late wife, which surprised everyone present. As he shouted at a subordinate for hesitating, Mike rushed to find the doctor, thinking it was the first time he had seen the Duke so worried about anyone. 10 minutes later, Mike returned with a doctor, considered the best in the region. Initially, the doctor refused to leave his office, explaining that he didn't make house calls. But when Mike threw a bag of gold coins onto the doctor's table, the sheer amount persuaded him to go. He couldn't resist such a sum. When the doctor arrived, he knew he was only there for the money, but seeing Duke Brad Willow in person made him uneasy. Though Brad appeared noble, the doctor had encountered many thugs in his time, and none compared to the Duke's fearsome presence. The baby's uncle, Brad, immediately shouted at the doctor to heal his niece without delay. He then noticed how sluggish and weak the girl seemed and began examining her, starting with a pulse check. Others gathered around the old doctor like looming shadows, making it hard for him to concentrate. A knight warned the doctor to be cautious with his words, but the doctor's conclusion was simple: the girl was merely exhausted and had fallen into a deep sleep. Rose, the nurse, confirmed this, knowing the princess better than anyone. However, some of Monica's attendants were furious, believing something was wrong based on the way she breathed, exhaling every 3 seconds. The doctor was baffled as to why he had been summoned if they didn't believe him. He couldn't understand why they were so concerned about her breathing. Brad then wondered aloud why the princess was sleeping so heavily and sweating if she wasn't ill. Despite the doctor's assurances, Brad was convinced that something was wrong with his niece, particularly because his own son had never exhibited such symptoms. Determined to find a more experienced doctor, Brad asked where the nearest large city was. Mike informed him that the city of Georgia was nearby but warned that going there would delay their journey. Unconcerned with the delay, Brad ordered them to head there at once. Mike was taken aback by the Duke's willingness to alter the schedule for the princess. Meanwhile, Helen, a mage, suggested summoning a doctor through a portal instead, and Brad agreed. She promptly set off with the knight, Mike, to carry out the task. Moving a bit further away from the group, Helen slammed her staff on the ground, gathering bluish energy that swirled into a portal. The wind generated from the portal was so strong that it even blew a spoon off the table, but Brad quickly caught it before it could land on the princess, preventing her from being disturbed further. Bending over his sleeping niece, Brad decided they would remain in the city for another day. He also ordered the knights to find accommodations worthy of a princess. After some time, they arrived at a local hotel. Mike reported that it was the best they could find, though Brad's focus remained on Monica's health. Sweat poured off her in streams, and the doctor warned that healing magic wouldn't help. He explained that because Monica was so young, magic could have unintended effects. Brad then instructed the mages to increase the room's temperature, though it would take time, given the cold northern winds blowing through the city. Rose, sitting in the corner, continued to insist that the princess was simply sleeping and couldn't understand why no one believed her. Angela, the fox, stayed close to her mistress, but even she realized that Monica's condition wasn't normal sleep. The knights began to chat amongst themselves, trusting the nurse and doctor that Monica was fine. But Mike remained cautious, choosing to follow the Duke's orders in case the princess truly was ill. Monica began to shiver from the cold and curled up into a ball to keep warm. In her sleep, she dreamed of her parents being near her, and the thought of leaving them frightened her. She even started murmuring about it in her sleep, and Brad picked her up in his arms to comfort her. Shortly afterward, Helen returned with the most renowned doctor in the area, Dr. Susie, who examined the princess. After her evaluation, Dr. Susie confirmed that the princess was simply exhausted. She suggested that the long journey had been too much for someone so young, and just like adults, children could suffer from extreme fatigue. Brad, now convinced by the doctor's words, allowed her to leave, and the knights rejoiced, happy that the princess was healthy. They thanked Helen for her efforts, though she had fainted again from the strain of opening the portal and was moved to a couch to rest. Later that night, when everyone had fallen asleep, Brad unexpectedly summoned his knights and announced a change in their schedule. First, he granted the knights a day off since Monica was so tired, which thrilled them. Mike had an urgent report for the Duke regarding his apprentice, Eddie, and Brad immediately suspected the boy had caused trouble again. Eddie was Brad's only apprentice, and rumors had reached Brad that the outer wall of the castle had been damaged once more during Eddie's training. This time, the destruction was worse than before, and it was clear it hadn't been caused by a storm. Frustrated, Brad ordered that Eddie's strength be monitored through regular training but also instructed Mike to halt Eddie's training until his return. Brad's eldest son, Matthew, wasn't currently at the castle, meaning the Duke himself was the only one capable of managing such destructive force. After giving his orders, Brad dismissed the knights, who were grateful for the unexpected rest. One of them expressed joy over the day off, remarking that in his 10 years of service, he had never had a single day off. Another knight remarked on how certain they were that the Duke and the princess were closely related by blood. They reminisced about Monica's mother, who would have become a legend if she were still alive. They also discussed the princess's beauty, comparing her to the previous Duke, noting how much more beautiful she was. They imagined how stunning Monica would be when she grew up, famous across the continent. Meanwhile, Brad approached Rose, suggesting that she also rest, but she objected, realizing how exhausted Brad was from the day's events. Despite her concerns, Brad insisted on staying with the princess. Rose reluctantly agreed, asking him to take good care of her. As she left, she noticed that Brad's expression had softened when looking at the little girl. She hoped it wasn't just her imagination and that it was a good sign. After the nurse left, Brad watched over the sleeping child, once again wondering if she truly was a prophet. Brad couldn't comprehend how a small child like Monica could possibly speak of conquering a dragon unless she were truly a prophet. The more he dwelled on it, the more time passed without answers.
He wondered if Monica would even be able to speak with him about such things.
If she were indeed a prophet, Brad knew he had an obligation to protect her, for her sake and for the sake of his apprentice, Eddie. He remembered how the current emperor had usurped the throne, killing everyone else but sparing this one child. On the other hand, taking Monica with him posed considerable risks, especially without solid reasons to justify it.
Brad also feared for Eddie's safety.
He worried that Eddie might die because of his connection to Monica, just as his sister Samantha had. If Monica wasn't truly a prophet, the Duke's efforts could prove futile, and it might even lead to a confrontation with the imperial family. His house couldn't afford to wage war against the current emperor. Yet, despite these worries, the princess had grown dear to him. The next morning, Monica awoke, stretching sweetly before noticing the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, she wondered if she had been reborn again. Looking around in confusion, she tried to understand where she was. Her thoughts were interrupted by the voice of her nanny, Rose, asking how she had slept and if she felt well rested. Rose explained that Monica had unexpectedly fallen asleep the previous day, and the Duke had arranged a proper chamber for her to rest. The nanny mentioned that after a quick breakfast, they would be leaving because they had to make it to the temple on time. Monica also realized that she had been asleep in the carriage during their journey and that they had stopped to allow her a good night's rest. The fox, Angela, had stayed near Monica the entire time, showing her devotion.
As soon as Monica woke up, Angela began demanding food, clearly hungry.
Monica, however, couldn't understand why Angela seemed so upset. She thought it was simply because she had fallen asleep during a meal, making the fox even hungrier. The princess also wondered why no one had fed Angela while she was asleep, but then it became clear, Angela refused to eat food offered by anyone but Monica.
The fox didn't trust anyone else and feared that someone might try to poison her.
Though Monica was certain that her assistants would never do such a thing, Angela remained wary, remembering how people had once tried to capture and sell her, or worse.
Monica decided not to argue with her beloved fox and resolved to feed Angela herself.
Afterward, the princess and her nanny headed to a restaurant where they were greeted by the knights and other well-wishers. They offered Monica an array of sweets and treats that had been specially prepared for her. Seeing the abundance of food, Monica joked to herself that Rose probably wouldn't need to bring food for her for a while.
The girl thanked everyone for their gifts, and in that moment, their eyes filled with admiration as she appeared angelic, almost saint-like.
Brad then joined them, and Monica's heart swelled with happiness at the sight of her uncle. However, this time, Brad merely looked away, avoiding her gaze. He quickly turned to Mike and ordered that everything be prepared for breakfast, as he intended to eat with the princess. The other onlookers felt a bit disappointed, but they were also glad that the Duke and Monica would be dining together. Before departing, Brad gave orders for all the gifts to be loaded into the carriage's luggage compartment. Some of the knights found this arrangement a bit excessive, but no one dared question the Duke's command. Soon, a splendid breakfast table was set, where Brad, Monica, and Angela the fox sat together, enjoying a feast of all sorts of delicious treats. After breakfast, the Duke suggested that the princess take a walk around the city and visit a toy store. Hearing this, Monica began to devour her food even faster, much to the surprise of her nanny, Rose, who stood with her mouth agape. Soon after, Brad was carrying the princess in his arms, and Monica wondered why there were so many attendants following them for what seemed like a simple walk. They first stopped by a flower shop, where the princess delighted in the pleasant scents. Afterward, they reached the toy store, and the attendants entertained Monica by playing with her. As they continued their walk, Monica spotted something that caught her attention, a knight's helmet. She asked her nanny to buy it for her. The helmet was beautifully crafted, and though it seemed strange to Rose that the princess would want such an item, Monica had her reasons. In her second life, just before her capture, a soldier had thrown a similar helmet at her head. While it hadn't caused her harm, the helmet reminded her of that moment. It also resembled the one she had seen in the Emperor's study, so she felt compelled to have it. Angela, the fox, approached to take a look and asked Monica to lift her up. The fox, too, was puzzled by the princess's choice, thinking it odd for a little girl to want such an item, but the helmet didn't appear ordinary. Monica turned to Rose again, insisting she wanted the helmet, and that she would even wear it herself. Nearby, Nightjack overheard and joked with another knight, Hilary, asking if she wanted a helmet too. Hilary, however, thought imitating the princess wasn't a good idea and asked Jack not to tease her. Mike, on the other hand, shared his thoughts with the Duke, revealing that the helmet once belonged to the previous Duchess, Samantha, Brad's sister. Brad was aware of this, and it reinforced his belief that blood doesn't lie, as Monica had chosen this helmet out of all the others. The silver helmet, engraved with a dragon, was a symbolic item that had belonged to Samantha. Brad approached the princess, and she asked him to buy the helmet for her. But before agreeing, Brad asked why she had chosen that particular one. Monica couldn't tell him about her previous life and quickly came up with an explanation. She said the helmet seemed to be calling her, so she wanted it. Brad was reminded of his youth, when he and his sister trained together, both of them wearing helmets. His was the one their father had given him, and Samantha wore the very helmet Monica now wanted. He remembered how his sister was always more agile, knocking the sword from his hands time and again during their training. Brad had leaned against a tree back then, offering to rest, but Samantha had mocked him, saying he lacked strength and wouldn't be able to defeat her in a real fight. Samantha had teased him about the helmet too, questioning why he cherished it so much. Brad had valued it as a gift from their father, but Samantha doubted its usefulness, as Brad didn't seem to have the skills to wield it properly. She herself loved her helmet and believed it always called to her, just as Monica now claimed. Samantha had been certain that one day her beloved brother would come to understand that connection. Brad was pulled out of his memories by another request from Monica to buy the helmet, and after that, they made their way to a confectionery shop. The place was beautiful, and Monica was enchanted. The clerk greeted them warmly, and Monica immediately expressed her desire for a cake with strawberries, chocolate, and grapes. Rose, concerned, suggested the princess choose only 2 pieces, doubting she could eat so much at once. But Brad intervened, allowing Monica to pick whatever she wanted, reminding her that he had promised to get her anything she desired. He instructed Mike to pay for everything and told the clerk which cakes to wrap. Monica was thrilled, knowing she'd receive all the treats she wanted, and the shopkeeper was equally happy with the generous payment. As he saw the large amount of money, he thought to himself that the Duke must be an heir to a vast fortune. Meanwhile, Monica was pleased that her uncle had kept his word. Angela, the fox, reminded Monica of her mission to please the Duke, as they were heading to the temple soon, and she had to win his favor. Determined, Monica took one of the cakes and approached Brad, offering him a piece as a gesture of kindness. Angela doubted that feeding him cake would truly win him over, but Monica persisted, holding out a spoonful of the dessert to her uncle. However, as Brad took a bite, his expression changed to one of disgust, as if Monica had offered him something revolting. Without warning, he threw the plate to the floor. The knights were shocked by his sudden action, and Monica was deeply hurt. She had only wanted to share something sweet with her uncle to please him, but instead, he had rejected her offering in such a harsh manner. To everyone else, it appeared as though Brad had intentionally dropped the plate, signaling disdain for the princess's favor. Knight Jack, always one for theatrics, immediately rushed over to the fallen cake, proclaiming loudly that it was his piece and that he wanted to eat it. His exaggerated enthusiasm confused the others, especially when another knight tried to wrest the fork from him, both of them bickering over the dessert that had caused such a scene. The Duke, meanwhile, handed Monica over to Rose, the nurse, who was on the verge of tears after what had just happened. Monica understood that her uncle might not have liked the cake, but he could have simply said so instead of throwing it to the ground. She tried her hardest not to cry, not wanting to seem weak or pathetic in front of her uncle. Mike, one of the knights, found the Duke's actions harsh, even treacherous, though he also thought that perhaps Brad had just made a mistake. Brad, seemingly regretful, approached the bakery's cellar and asked for a very expensive fig cake, but the baker explained that they could only make 1 cake per day, and that day's batch was already sold. The man in charge couldn't help any further. Seeing the situation, Rose suggested taking the princess back to her chambers, and she even offered to make the fig cake herself. While all this was happening, the knights realized that Helen, the mage girl, had disappeared. There was still much to prepare before they could leave, but Helen had something in mind and was already on her way down the tiled sidewalk. She soon arrived at the bakery, tossing a bag of gold coins to the seller. Her request? A fig cake. The problem was, there were no figs left for the day.
But Helen didn't see this as a real obstacle. In a flash, a decent pile of figs magically appeared on the counter, and the cook couldn't refuse the request any longer. Helen ordered him to get to work immediately since there were now plenty of ingredients available. In another part of the store, Brad quietly exited, relieved he hadn't run into Helen. Stepping outside into the cool night air, Brad took a moment to reflect. He liked the night's refreshing breeze but couldn't shake the memory of his niece's sad expression as she clung to her nanny. He wanted to make it up to her. Instead of another cake, Brad decided to buy the helmet Monica had wanted from the shop earlier. However, as he walked, he questioned why he even cared. It wasn't just concern for the princess, he realized it was something deeper. Looking at that helmet had brought back memories of his sister, Samantha. The way Monica reminded him of Samantha explained why he was feeling such strange and powerful emotions. Meanwhile, Monica sat in Rose's arms as the nanny informed her that they would be leaving soon, and the princess could sleep longer during the journey. The cool air drifted through the window, and the distant sound of horses could be heard. As Monica dozed, memories from her past life surged back. She recalled how, back then, her nanny had decided to leave her. Guards had separated Monica from Rose, and the girl understood that her nanny had been trying to escape. All people cared about during that time was how quickly they could flee before dawn. Rose had managed to escape for a while, but she was caught and sentenced to death. The memory brought tears to Monica's eyes, and Rose couldn't understand why the princess was crying. Monica was terrified that her nanny would leave her again, but Rose reassured her, promising that she would never abandon her. Deciding to leave earlier than scheduled, the party moved quietly, not wanting to wake the still sleeping girl. Monica felt safe for the moment, but just before falling asleep again, she asked her nanny not to leave her. Rose, deeply moved, promised she would always stay by her side. Carrying Monica in her arms, Rose headed toward the carriage, and suddenly, the princess spotted something that made her eyes light up: the fig cake she adored so much, carefully packaged and ready for her. The sight of it made all her drowsiness vanish. Helen was pleased to see Monica smiling again and didn't mind the exhaustion she had endured for the sake of acquiring those figs. Monica asked the knights and Rose to bring Helen to her, wanting to thank the magician girl for the effort. Just then, she saw her uncle passing by, but to her dismay, Brad didn't even glance in her direction. Monica immediately thought her uncle was still upset about the incident with the cake, though in reality, she felt that she had the right to be the one upset. Nevertheless, she gathered her courage, ready to take the first step toward reconciliation. Before she could act, Mike approached her and relayed the Duke's message that Brad wanted to go on his way alone. Monica was confused and hurt. She couldn't understand why her uncle was acting this way. Mike clarified that, due to a schedule change, the Duke and some of his subordinates had already left for the place where the dragon had been conquered. But despite Mike's explanation, Monica still felt abandoned. She was particularly hurt because Brad had left without even saying goodbye. It made her think that her uncle was simply tired of looking after her and had decided to leave her behind. As she mulled over the situation, Monica's mind wandered back to the cake incident, which now seemed like a small misunderstanding, but still stung. She desperately wanted to reconcile with her uncle and go with him to the north, no matter what. But now, she feared she might miss her chance. Despite having the elite knights with her, sworn to protect her at the cost of their lives, Monica couldn't shake the feeling that her uncle had only pretended to care for her to avoid offending the imperial family. Monica's thoughts were swirling with confusion and negativity, despite her hope that she was mistaken about the situation. All her plans seemed to be falling apart, and she couldn't understand why. She had only wanted to help the Duke, which was why she had told him that the Emperor knew about the dragon's subjugation and that things could end badly. She had even answered all the questions about the Book of Names, but none of it seemed to work. Now, Monica thought it might be best to forget about Brad entirely. After all, in her previous life, he hadn't helped her, and the imperial family didn't love her, not then and not now. However, one pressing problem remained: after the temple blessing, she had to return to the imperial family. The thought terrified her, but Angela, the fox, promised to protect her if anything went wrong, reassuring Monica that there was no need to worry. Monica felt comforted by Angela's words, grateful that she wasn't alone. She was so tired of being abandoned by everyone.
As Brad rode away, Greg, one of the knights, noticed that the Duke seemed concerned about the princess. When he asked if Brad was worried, the Duke responded curtly, asking Greg if he really looked like a man who was overcome by emotions. Greg quickly assured him that he didn't. Still, Greg thought that the Duke might have wanted to stay with the princess longer. Brad, feeling the weight of the candy in his pocket that Monica had given him earlier, was distracted by his own thoughts. Greg brought him back to the moment, guessing that the Duke was serious because he had to leave his niece. Greg, along with the other knights, was surprised by how much Brad seemed to care for Monica. For most of them, this was their first time seeing the Duke so emotionally invested in someone. Despite his feelings, Brad knew he had to remain focused because the dragon, Spike, would not be an easy opponent. Meanwhile, Monica's carriage continued its journey, and the princess decided to share her last piece of candy with Rose, the nanny. She thought about how, once back with the imperial family, she wouldn't be able to eat as many sweets, so she generously gave them to Rose. She also imagined how difficult things might become, especially with the knights who would be accompanying her. 3 days later, they were nearing the temple, and Mike, one of the knights, commented that Monica had become better at enduring long trips. But suddenly, Monica burst into tears, realizing that they would soon have to part. Helen, the mage, was also upset about the upcoming separation. She promised Monica that she would return as soon as the dragon was conquered, and even promised to bring her a large fig cake. Despite these promises, Monica couldn't shake the feeling that her uncle had abandoned her, just like in her previous life. She had begun to think of Brad as a bad person. Yet, strangely, she didn't feel any anger toward him. During the time they had spent together, she had been happy, and she would cherish those memories, especially the moment of their pinky finger reconciliation. After a short stop, they were about to continue their journey when Jack and Helen noticed something: another carriage was approaching. The knights immediately prepared to defend the princess. Behind the carriage, they saw a man with a distinct gaze, and the flag of the imperial family hung from the approaching vehicle. The knights questioned the man, ready to defend Monica with their lives if necessary. Suddenly, Albert, the commander of the Imperial Knights, rode up. Mike, introducing himself as one of Duke Willow's men, explained that he had been entrusted with guarding the princess. Albert, however, announced that he had been ordered to take Monica under his care, as per the Emperor's command. Hearing this, Monica's heart sank. In her previous life, Albert had tormented her the most, and she couldn't understand why he had come for her now. Another commander had led the efforts to conquer dragons and wage wars, while Albert was notorious for doing the Emperor's dirty work, directing the hounds that operated in the shadows of the Empire. Now, this ruthless commander had come to take her to the palace. Mike tried to negotiate, explaining that he needed to take the princess to the temple first, as per Duke Willow's orders, and asked Albert to let them pass. Mike, known as the Smiling Devil, subtly threatened Albert, making it clear that he wouldn't hand over the princess without a fight. However, Albert wasn't fazed. He didn't believe that the Duke's orders could override the Emperor's and refused to back down. Monica, terrified, feared that she would once again fall into the hands of the imperial family and face the same bullying she had experienced in her previous life. She had been trying so hard to get closer to her uncle, and now, everything seemed to be slipping away. Albert continued to press the knights, warning that if they didn't comply, it could lead to a conflict with the imperial family. He gave them one final chance to step aside before he would consider it an act of rebellion. Mike, realizing that the situation was escalating, offered a compromise. He asked Albert to take the carriage with him, explaining that it was specially equipped with magical comforts for the princess. Albert accepted this offer, but Mike had a bad feeling. There was little more he could do, and he silently prayed that the Duke would return soon. Mike noticed that Monica looked like she was on the verge of tears, and he felt a deep sadness, knowing he couldn't protect her from what was happening. Helen and Jack objected strongly, insisting that they couldn't simply hand over the princess. They found Albert suspicious and even suggested following him. But Mike reminded them of the Duke's orders not to provoke a conflict with the imperial family, emphasizing that their mission was to conquer the dragon. With a heavy heart, Mike decided to join Brad in the dragon hunt, though he couldn't stop thinking about how to inform the Duke of what had transpired. Monica, meanwhile, read the knights' messages in the chat. They promised to return for her after they had conquered the dragon. Helen protested the most, vowing to find Monica at all costs and even talking about punishing the knights who had let her be taken. Monica thought of each knight in turn: Jack, Greg, Hilary, the magician Roger who was like a grandfather to her, and, of course, Helen. They had all promised her that they would reunite, though now it seemed unlikely. One by one, the knights' messages faded from the chat, until only Mike's remained. He begged for the princess's forgiveness, apologizing for not being able to protect her, and said he was ready to accept any punishment for his failure. Eventually, even Mike's voice disappeared, and Monica burst into tears. Rose, her nanny, tried to console her, but Monica felt utterly lost and abandoned once again. Monica began to cry uncontrollably, prompting the nanny to try comforting her. Despite these efforts, the carriage came to a halt as her sobbing continued. Albert decided to intervene and uncover the reason for the commotion. The commander expressed his belief that a girl who could not endure a simple journey was unfit to bear the title of princess. Rose, however, objected, reminding Albert that Monica was still an extremely young child, not even 4 years old. Albert, unimpressed by her defense, silenced Rose with a harsh warning, threatening that she would lose her tongue if she spoke again. Without hesitation, he seized Monica by the scruff of her neck and yanked her out of the carriage, forcing her to ride under his grip, which made it difficult for her to breathe. Witnessing this, the fox prepared to use its magic to protect its mistress. At that moment, Monica was overwhelmed by memories of her past life, where she had also been subjected to cruelty. Terrified, she silently prayed for someone to intervene and save her and the nanny. Her prayers were unexpectedly answered when Albert was suddenly knocked down by a fist, landing sprawled on the ground. To her astonishment, it was her uncle Brad who had come to her rescue. Brad freed Monica from the commander's grip, scooped her into his arms, and apologized for his tardiness. Monica, still shaken, opened her eyes and was surprised to see her uncle standing there, flanked by a band of knights. For the first time in this life, she felt a glimmer of hope as she realized that so many people were willing to protect her. Commander Albert, regaining his composure, demanded to know why the Duke was there. Brad, visibly furious, accused Albert and his men of forfeiting their right to live twice over for treating the princess so poorly. Unyielding, Albert dismissed Brad's anger and viewed his interference as a challenge to the emperor's authority, essentially a declaration of war. The Duke, however, was unbothered and declared that before any war, he would first teach Albert and his subordinates a lesson in proper manners, a sentiment echoed enthusiastically by the knights. The group began selecting their opponents, eager to deliver justice like scolding naughty dogs. Albert, understanding that Brad's knights were among the elite, including highly skilled mages, realized that losing here would have far-reaching consequences. He opted to retreat, vowing to report the incident to the emperor. As Albert withdrew, he mockingly instructed Brad to take good care of their princess, further provoking the Duke. Brad warned Albert against addressing Monica in such a possessive manner unless he was ready to lose his tongue. Disgruntled, Albert and his team left, though the knights accompanying Brad were visibly disappointed, as they had been itching for a fight. Once the tension eased, Monica asked her uncle if he was going to leave her again. Brad, puzzled by her question, assured her that he had no intention of doing so. Monica tearfully confessed that she had cried a great deal because she believed he had abandoned her. In response, Brad handed her a fig candy and explained that he had only left to find this treat for her. His explanation brought joy to Monica, and the knights couldn't suppress their grins of happiness. Monica, delighted by the candy, realized her uncle had no plans to leave her, though she still carried the pain of their earlier separation. Eventually, Monica fell asleep. When she awoke, she gazed at the sky and was relieved to remember that her uncle's return had not been a dream. The fox, glad to see its mistress awake, had worried that she might have fainted. Monica learned that while she had slept for 3 hours, they had nearly reached the temple. Noticing her trembling, the knights assumed she was cold, though they quickly dismissed this possibility, as the temple's surroundings were always maintained at a constant temperature. They speculated instead that she might still be frightened by her encounter with Albert and his men. Helen, one of the knights, enthusiastically suggested using magic to hunt down the villains and rain meteorites upon them, calling it justice. However, the time had come to enter the temple, which only a limited number of people could access at once. Helen wrapped Monica in a blanket she had brought, causing the fox to think that the princess now resembled a ball of yarn. Monica curiously asked her uncle about the temple, though she already recognized it from her previous life. She had visited this place so frequently in the past that she now felt a deep aversion to it. As they approached the temple, the Duke carried Monica in his arms, and a servant of the deity warmly greeted them. The servant also expressed gratitude to Brad for bringing the princess to the sacred site. Upon their arrival at the temple, the Duke immediately noticed the absence of the head priest, who should have been present to greet them. The priest, as the temple's leader, was expected to oversee their visit, but a servant explained that he had urgent matters to attend to and had temporarily left. This explanation puzzled Monica, as she needed the priest's blessing, and the Duke, seemingly sensing her thoughts, voiced his displeasure, demanding further clarification. The servant suggested that other local priests could perform the ceremony just as competently, but Brad found it unacceptable that the head priest would leave during a visit from the imperial family. The servant, trying to placate him, insisted there had been no intentional disrespect. At that moment, High Priest Harris, who was temporarily acting in the priest's stead, appeared. Monica immediately recognized him from her past life as a kind and respected man among the clergy. Tragically, he had been the first victim of the priests who later aligned with Theodore. Harris apologized for the head priest's absence, explaining that it was due to urgent matters. This, however, did little to soothe Brad's frustration. Harris then requested a private word with the Duke, and Brad instructed the knights to take a walk while they talked. In their discussion, Harris revealed that the head priest had left because he had heard the voice of God, a phenomenon that had not occurred in 1,000 years. Hearing this, Monica was startled, as such an event had not happened in her previous life, though she admitted to herself that she was too young then to remember everything clearly. Observing her uncle's expression, Monica realized that the explanation had calmed his anger. Harris proposed proceeding with the blessing ceremony and began making the necessary arrangements. Brad handed Monica over to a servant, who guided her to a hall with a fountain. While Monica felt uneasy in the unfamiliar surroundings, she was comforted by the thought that her uncle had accompanied her despite all the challenges. Harris performed the ritual by scooping water from the fountain and sprinkling it onto Monica's forehead. When he asked her to open her eyes, a golden glow immediately radiated above her head, brightening the temple noticeably. Monica recognized this phenomenon from her second life. It signified that she had received the blessing. Following the ceremony, Monica was returned to her uncle, and it was clear she felt more at ease in his arms. Afterward, Harris suggested that Brad bring Monica back to the temple for future ceremonies, but the Duke declared that next time, he would summon the priest to the north instead. Monica was astonished by his bold declaration, yet as they exited the temple, her attention was drawn to a statue of the goddess. She immediately recognized it as the goddess of fate who had reincarnated her. While the fox was thrilled by this revelation, Monica felt no joy, as her memories of that meeting were filled with disappointment. The goddess had promised her a loving family, but her life had turned out quite differently. Monica, still pondering her uncle's words, worried whether this meant she would now be sent to the imperial family. When she addressed Brad as master, he was taken aback, and she explained that she no longer wanted to grow attached to anyone who would abandon her. The Duke gently clarified that he was her uncle, they were family, and she would live with her family. He then informed her that he planned to take her to his ducal estate, leaving Monica in disbelief. It felt too good to be true. However, her joy was interrupted when Mike, a knight, approached Brad for an urgent discussion. As the Duke stepped aside to talk, Monica stayed behind, eating cookies while surrounded by the nurse and other knights. Curious about the conversation, Monica tried to eavesdrop. The fox offered to help, using its magic to briefly hide her presence. Sneaking closer, Monica overheard Mike expressing concern about Brad's decision to take her in. He warned that such a move could provoke an all-out war. Brad, unshaken, insisted that he was willing to face any consequences, even war, to protect Monica. As they continued talking, Brad mentioned that Monica was a prophet and hinted at considering Eddie as a potential match for her. Hearing this, Monica felt disheartened, realizing she might merely be a tool for Brad to solidify his political power and advance his ambitions toward the throne. At that moment, Monica accidentally stumbled, and the fox's concealment magic wore off. Startled by her sudden appearance, Mike and Brad turned to see her. The Duke lifted her from the ground, curious as to why she was crying again.
Monica pointed to her dirted cookies, and Mike immediately offered to eat them for her. Despite the momentary embarrassment, Monica was glad to know she would be staying with her uncle, though she decided she no longer wanted to delve into his true motives. Soon after, Brad received a magical message that left him visibly angered. Mike, sensing trouble, inquired about the issue and learned that Spike's subordination had been postponed and that he was to be reinstated. The knights grew tense, knowing that the dragon's restored status would bring significant challenges for the family. Once again, the imperial family had taken an interest in Spike and was attempting to track and control him, but the task was proving difficult. Frustrated, Brad ordered the knights to prepare to return. Monica, noticing her uncle's determination, asked him if they were going north. When he nodded, her heart filled with relief. Despite her earlier disappointment in her uncle, Monica felt a glimmer of happiness as she resolved to keep hoping for the day when he would love her wholeheartedly. For now, she shifted her focus to the journey ahead. The band of knights who accompanied the group sang merrily about the sweetest princess traveling with them. They joked that even an ogre would learn to fly at the sight of Monica's smile, and they praised her ability to win hearts with just a single cute wink. Their enthusiasm, however, began to wear on the Duke, who grew tired of their constant singing. Mike explained that the knights were simply excited, which seemed to placate him. Amidst all the noise, Monica managed to sleep soundly, leaving Brad a little envious of her peaceful rest. However, Monica's dreams were plagued by nightmares, filled with sorrowful memories of her past life. When she finally woke up, she saw a hand reaching toward her, much like in her nightmare, but it turned out to be Uncle Brad, who was simply brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. Reflexively, the girl flinched, her fears stemming from her past experiences, where such gestures had often preceded violence. Brad noticed her reaction and fell silent, not saying a word for the rest of the trip. Monica regretted her reaction and hoped he would forget it soon, as she feared he might deem her useless if he believed she was afraid of him. Determined not to raise suspicions, Monica decided to act more childlike and even planned to offer bits of information to her uncle to ensure she remained valuable to him, at least until they had settled together in the north. As the carriage approached the border of Willow's lands, Monica noticed the landscape changing. She thought of the north as a place of magical snow and cold. Just then, she sneezed, feeling the drop in temperature, and Helen quickly conjured a blanket to keep her warm. The carriage now felt as cozy as if it had a heated floor, and Monica soon felt more comfortable. Wrapped in the blanket, she resembled a turtle, a comparison that amused Brad. During the next halt, Monica decided to stretch her legs outside. However, the cold was harsher than she had expected, and she was surprised to see her nanny, Rose, handling it with ease. It turned out that Rose's grandmother was a northerner, which explained her resistance to the cold. Monica herself was bundled up in a fur coat and scarf, so much so that she could barely move her lips. When her nanny adjusted the scarf, Monica felt even more like a turtle. The fox, Angela, laughed at her appearance, teasing that she had never seen her mistress look funnier. The journey resumed, and soon they arrived at a town on the border of Willow's lands. Monica noticed the high walls adorned with the Duke's coat of arms and a massive gate. The townsfolk welcomed Brad's return with joy, while Monica curiously observed the lively city. The snow-covered town bustled with activity, defying the Empire's stereotype of the North as a desolate place. The people were tall, reminding Monica of her mother, and she concluded that she likely took after her father instead. As the carriage approached the Duke's castle, the townsfolk noticed Monica for the first time. Whispered conversations spread among them, and many viewed her as nothing more than a useless lump of trouble. They doubted that she could contribute anything meaningful to the North, despite being the daughter of the previous Duke. The whispers reached Monica's ears as she sat in the carriage. Angela, using her magic, let Monica overhear every word for a brief moment. The townsfolk speculated that the princess had either died during the throne's usurpation or had been imprisoned, and now that she had returned to the north, they saw it as an ill omen. Angela was furious at their remarks and wanted to incinerate them on the spot, but Monica stopped her, urging the fox to keep calm. Angela then tried to lighten the mood by inviting Monica to go out with her, pointing out that the fox always received treats wherever she went. Angela joked that she could easily gather enough food to share with Monica if she wanted. Soon after, they entered the castle, where they were greeted by the castle's manager, Christian Theon. Monica, still trembling from the cold, felt small and out of place in her uncle's arms. Noticing this, Brad immediately ordered that they have a proper meal after such a long journey. The group gathered around a grand table, and the fox shamelessly asked for the largest piece of meat for herself. Monica, meanwhile, tried to enjoy the feast while distracting herself from her anxieties. Messages from a system-like chat window began popping up in her mind, notifying her of new updates and members. Feeling overwhelmed, Monica opted to turn the notifications off for 30 minutes, allowing herself to focus on the meal and savor the warmth and comfort of the moment. Monica's attention was drawn to a luscious raspberry cake adorned with large berries, a rare northern variety. She stared at it in awe, and the Duke noticed her interest. Without hesitation, he ordered the servants to bring her all the raspberries available. Christian, the steward, tried to object, explaining that the berries had been reserved for bra, a traditional northern dish. However, the Duke firmly repeated his command. These raspberries were highly prized. Ordinary aristocrats would wait years for a chance to taste them, so the steward was shocked that the Duke gave them to Monica so easily. After all, she wasn't just an ordinary girl, she was the last unfortunate survivor of the imperial family. Monica was soon served the berries and ate them gratefully, touched by her uncle's gesture. Brad noticed how quickly the plate was emptied and asked why she hadn't said she was hungry earlier. Embarrassed, Monica promised to eat less if it meant her uncle wouldn't hate her. Brad clarified that this wasn't what he meant at all, he simply wanted her to eat more slowly so she wouldn't upset her stomach. After the meal, Monica was shown to her room, which seemed luxurious beyond her imagination. The bed was so soft that it felt like she was floating on clouds. She lay down, recalling the happy moments from their journey, and wished that time could stand still. She also hoped that only kind-hearted people would remain in the world. With these thoughts, she drifted off to sleep. Meanwhile, Greg called a meeting, and Brad attended without knowing its purpose. During the meeting, the attendees expressed their concerns about the Duke bringing the princess to the north. They worried about the challenges this might bring, including the Duke's controversial decision to attempt to tame Spike, which had led to environmental destruction and his temporary absence from his domain. Rumors had already begun to spread among his subjects, and what infuriated Brad the most was the suggestion that the Emperor might already know about his plans to conquer Spike. This meant there was likely a traitor among his ranks, perhaps even more than one. Mike reassured the group that they could resume their efforts to subdue Spike at any time. He also emphasized the importance of Monica's presence, as the princess played a key role in maintaining relations with the imperial family. Brad added that Monica might also have the gift of prophecy, which stunned those present. They remembered the greatness of the prophets of the past, though Brad admitted this was only speculation. Some proposed returning Monica to the empty castle for observation, as her presence could be dangerous. However, Brad slammed his fist on the table, silencing the room. He declared that Monica was family, a descendant of Samantha Willow, the pride and hero of the North, and demanded anyone present give a single reason why he shouldn't protect her. The Duke made it clear that sending Monica to the imperial family was out of the question. He stated that he wouldn't regret his decisions, even if tensions escalated. Brad's commanding tone reminded everyone of the fearsome warrior he had been years ago, a man known for his rampages as a tyrant and a mad dog. No one dared challenge him. He concluded with a warning: if anyone spoke ill of the princess, he would take it as a personal insult. Meanwhile, Monica woke up in her room, unsure of where she was. In her dream, she saw giant figs and cakes flying around her. She followed the floating cake until it landed in the hands of a faceless boy, who then devoured it in one gulp. Horrified, Monica tried to get closer to identify him, but she couldn't see his face. The boy then turned and began running toward her, startling her awake. The dream left Monica deeply unsettled, and as she looked around the dimly lit room, the darkness seemed heavy and eerie. Suddenly, she noticed a bright spot on the wall resembling the outline of a person. Convinced she was seeing a ghost, she screamed and dove under her blanket in terror. The next morning, Rose came into the room as usual and asked Monica how she had slept. The nanny immediately noticed the girl's swollen face and gently asked what was wrong. Monica whimpered and began recounting her encounter with what she believed was a real ghost. At that moment, Brad and Mike entered the room, quickly deducing that Monica had simply had a nightmare.
The princess vehemently disagreed, insisting that what she experienced was far too vivid to be just a dream. She even woke up Angela, her fox companion, to confirm the presence of a ghost.
Angela, as a messenger of the god, should have been able to detect any unusual energy or spiritual presence in the room.
However, the fox, despite her remarkable abilities, detected nothing out of the ordinary and concluded that Monica's experience had indeed been a dream. Though the princess was still shaken, her uncle reassured her, and the day continued. As Monica sat in her room, still shaken from the previous night, Rose approached her unexpectedly, causing the princess to flinch. Rose quickly reassured her, promising to catch any ghosts that might frighten her.
Brad entered the room shortly after and asked what they were talking about.
Monica recounted her experience, and the Duke, looking perplexed, teasingly remarked that she might not want to eat the raspberry cake anymore if ghosts scared her so much. At the sight of the delicious cake, Monica quickly reversed her stance and admitted it was just a dream. Seeing her gluttonous enthusiasm, Brad noticed another similarity between her and his older sister. Later, Mike suggested that Monica's nightmares might stem from her lack of peers. The Duke didn't initially understand, prompting the knight to elaborate. Given the bad weather, Monica and the others would be staying at the residence for a while, and Mike proposed bringing a child her age to keep her company. Brad considered this and thought of his son, Eddie, but since Eddie was studying abroad, he wasn't available. Mike took it upon himself to select a suitable companion and chose a child from the well-regarded Clark family. Brad approved of the choice, trusting the family's reputation. The next afternoon, while Monica was painting in her room, Mike arrived. After greeting her and Rose, he introduced a boy named Trevor. Trevor respectfully bowed to Monica and explained that he had been invited to be her companion so she wouldn't feel lonely. Mike added that since the Duke's own children were unavailable, he had chosen Trevor for his intelligence and good manners. Rose was thrilled by the news, but Monica was less enthusiastic, secretly thinking she'd prefer to spend time with princes instead.
Mike left them alone to get acquainted.
As Trevor stood before her, Monica studied his face carefully. It seemed oddly familiar.
Suddenly, she remembered where she had seen him before, in her previous life, though as an adult.
Shocked, she recalled that the Clark family had betrayed the North in that life, and Trevor himself had grown into a monstrous figure. He had consolidated all power in the North, engaged in human trafficking, and committed heinous crimes, including harming women. Even the imperial family had been powerless against him, despite his origins as a mere aristocrat. Horrified by these memories, Monica shouted for Rose, who had gone to fetch cookies and drinks, not to leave her alone with him. But Rose was already gone. Left alone, Monica was paralyzed as her memories replayed the horrors Trevor had inflicted in the past. Trevor, unaware of her thoughts, tried to teach her the proper etiquette of being a princess. However, Monica remained silent, staring at him with growing dread. Later that evening, Mike sat in his study, waiting for Brad, who had been delayed. A maid rushed in, panicked, and informed him of a major problem. Fearing something had happened to Monica, Mike hurried to her room. On the way, he noticed several maids clustered outside her door, hesitant to enter. From inside, he could hear the sound of a child crying. Worried that Monica had been hurt, Mike burst into the room, only to find an unexpected scene. Monica was arguing fiercely with Trevor, who was being pecked by a flock of birds. To Mike's shock, Monica then bit Trevor's hand with surprising ferocity, as if he were her worst enemy. Earlier, Trevor had taunted Monica, standing over her and smugly declaring that she was nothing more than a symbol of bad luck in the abandoned castle. He mocked her, claiming the Duke had only taken pity on her by bringing her here but had already left her again. With no one else around, Trevor said he would now take care of her. Monica remembered how talkative and arrogant he had been in her past life and was appalled by how nasty he could be, even as a child. Angela, the fox, encouraged Monica to stand up for herself, pointing out that she wasn't the same powerless girl she had been before. When Trevor arrogantly tried to touch Monica's forehead, she immediately slapped his hand away and shouted at him not to touch her with his dirty hands. Trevor, unbothered, remarked that she wasn't as cute as he'd imagined. Enraged, Monica decided to teach him a lesson. Without hesitation, she charged at him and punched him in the nose. Trevor, still defiant, claimed she was only angry because he didn't treat her like a cutie.
Before he could finish his sentence, Monica attacked him again, this time with more force. Seeing her determination, Angela decided to assist. The fox helped Monica summon all the nearby animals, and Monica, emboldened, commanded them to target Trevor. Birds swarmed him, pecking at his clothes and hair, much to his dismay. Monica felt a surge of satisfaction. She realized she should have stood up for herself like this in her past life. The fox urged her to continue the attack and make Trevor regret his behavior, calling him a bastard who deserved a proper lesson. As Trevor taunted Monica further, claiming he would turn her into his toy and that the rumors about her were true, the princess reacted instinctively. She bit his fingers hard, refusing to let him intimidate her. This scene was witnessed by Mike, who had run toward the room after hearing a servant's scream. Monica, noticing Mike at the door, quickly stepped back, unsure of how to explain herself. Meanwhile, Trevor continued to mock her, complaining loudly about being bitten and pecked by birds. Monica panicked internally, fearing her Uncle Brad's reaction when he learned she had bitten the son of a prominent northern family. She thought the Duke would no longer treat her as family, and her tragic history from her past life would repeat itself. She remembered how Trevor had used his connections to hide his evil deeds in her previous life, and she resolved not to tolerate it this time. As Trevor exaggerated his injuries, Monica turned the tables, loudly accusing him of trying to hit her. Rose, who had just returned, immediately fussed over Monica, asking if she was okay. Taking the opportunity, Monica began to embellish her story further, portraying herself as the victim. Mike, standing over Trevor, began questioning the boy about what had really happened. Trevor suddenly fell silent, his confidence shaken. At that moment, Trevor's father, Robert Clark, entered the room, furious at seeing his son's bloody hands. Mike assured him that a doctor had already been called, but Robert was skeptical. He refused to believe that his son, who already held several honors and achievements, could have attacked first. Robert even accused Mike of covering for the princess, which deeply disappointed him. Unbeknownst to Robert, Mike was following explicit orders from the Duke to protect the princess at all costs. Monica, watching the knight defend her, was surprised and grateful that he had taken her side in such a complicated situation. Robert, still unaware of Brad's protective stance toward Monica, demanded to meet the Duke in person to resolve the matter. Brad, who was supposed to be in his office, decided to visit Monica first. Upon entering the room, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Robert was quick to inform him that the princess had bitten his son and expressed concern that Trevor might lose his arm. Trevor, pretending to be in great pain, clutched his hand dramatically. Brad turned to the children and, in a calm but firm tone, asked Trevor directly if what Robert said was true. Monica, feeling guilty, admitted that she had bitten Trevor and acknowledged that it wasn't the right thing to do. However, Brad ignored her confession and repeated his question to Trevor. When Robert tried to interject again, Brad cut him off, pointing to the red mark on Monica's forehead. This shifted the focus to the injury Monica had sustained. Robert tried to remind the Duke of everything his family had done for the North, but Brad was uninterested in the father's attempts to deflect. For Brad, the priority was clear: his niece had been harmed, and that was unacceptable. He challenged anyone who doubted her to come forward, but no one dared speak. Just then, the doctor arrived, and Robert assumed he would treat Trevor first. However, Brad stopped the doctor and ordered him to begin with Monica instead. He then dismissed everyone from the room, including Rose and Robert, who barely had time to scoop up his son before being ushered out. After examining Monica, the doctor applied a small plaster to her forehead. Brad gently picked up his niece and asked her how she felt. Monica, touched by his concern, pointed to the plaster and admitted it hurt a little. However, she noticed her uncle's expression darken, as if he were imagining punishing Trevor severely for harming her. Worried, Monica quickly reassured him that the injury wasn't serious and that she was fine. Brad seemed to calm down and stroked her hair gently. He told her that no one should ever touch her without her consent and advised her to always inform him if something like this happened again. Monica, overwhelmed by his kindness, clung tightly to him. Hearing him call her family once more made her heart melt. Meanwhile, the knights outside the room were discussing the incident. They found it amusing how Robert's usual confidence had crumbled and couldn't help laughing at his flustered expression.
At the same time, they praised Monica's bravery and ability to defend herself. However, they were puzzled by the flock of birds that had attacked Trevor. The knights speculated that Monica might possess magical abilities, though Helen, a mage, felt the energy wasn't magical but rather something sacred. Later, during a strategy meeting, Mike reminded Brad about the tradition of holding a ceremonial event to present gifts to the princess. He suggested that it would be a good time to strengthen Monica's position in the north. Brad agreed, noting that it was Monica's first visit to the north and that she deserved to be honored. After some thought, he decided to turn the event into a grand celebration, especially since the princess had endured so much during the journey. He also declared that no noble house hostile to Monica would be invited. The Duke set the date for the following weekend and ordered the necessary preparations. A week later, Rose excitedly told Monica about the celebration planned in her honor. She explained that nobles from across the north would come to greet her and offer her gifts. Monica listened with curiosity and a touch of nervousness, knowing the event would mark an important moment in her new life.